Right, all right, all right. There we go. We got Trevor in here. There's Ishan. One more to go. We'll wait for Miss Jacqueline. Beautiful. All right. Well, we got everybody here. Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in and for the people that are going to be trickling in here over the next couple minutes or so. My name's Braxton Bartlett. I'll be hosting and moderating today on behalf of EB5 Lending Alliance and EB5investors.com. We are joined by a pretty powerhouse panel today. Mr. Trevor Anderson of the Home Fed Corporation, Miss Jacqueline Trevino out of the PSBP Law, and Mr. Ishan Khanna out of AIIA. Today's entire topic, the entire premise of everything is you've got three different viewpoints from people for all the people listening in, where we're going to be analyzing and talking about warning signs for EB5 investors, what you should look for before choosing a project, and things to just overall pay attention to. Today's session's going to be roughly around 45 minutes. We're going to have about 30 minutes of speaking for between the three of our panelists, as well as there's going to be a 10 to 15 minute Q&A towards the end. The chat will be open the entire time. So for anybody who is listening in, if you have a particular question in mind that you want to ask to anybody, you've got a wide array of expertise here. So feel free to ask it whenever. And we will kick it off. I'm going to pass it first to Mr. Trevor. Trevor, I want to start with the foundation of many EB5 deals, right? The loan model, how that operates. When investors see terms that are thrown around, such as secured loan, first position, capital stack, what should they really be paying attention to, and what exactly do these really mean?
Yeah, so of course the EB5 loan model is real popular in today's market. I mean, we do have equity options as well, but the loan model has proven to be arguably the safest EB5 option, the most predictable. But the loans come in different varieties. So primarily senior loans and mezzanine loans, right? So a senior loan is going to be in the first position, right? It's going to have a senior security. It's going to be secured by the project itself or maybe an alternative piece of collateral. So the investor is protected, right? There's a safety net that is immediately there to protect the investors in case of a default. Whereas in the mezzanine position, that means there's a bank or another lender ahead of the EB5 investor. And the bank has the senior position. The bank has the immediate security, the collateral, and the property. So the EB5 investors in that case are generally less protected. And so you have really these two primary options, which are the senior position or the mezzanine position.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And in terms, another issue we'll see is unclear use of funds descriptions. Would you say, seeing on your guys on HomeFed, what's a red flag investors should typically look out for in terms of how their money's being deployed during construction or overall pre-construction processes for these projects, no matter if they qualify or market themselves as a senior loan, mezzanine loan, or anything of the sort?
Yeah, generally speaking, the EB5 funds have to go towards the development of the project, right? I mean, this is assuming we're talking about a real estate deal here, which is the predominant, EB5 investment opportunity.
Yeah.
But these funds need to go into the development of the project. So ideally, the project's under construction. There's a clear path, construction activities happening. EB5 funds are directly used in the construction of that project, or the funds could be used to reimburse expenses that have already been spent. Right? We have a lot of times we have a bridge model in place where alternative funding is provided to the project to construct the project while the EB5 funds are being sourced and raised.
Yeah.
Then the EB5 funds are released to the project to reimburse those construction costs. But of course, we need to make sure that those funds are going to the project, that they're appropriately used, that they're actually creating the jobs, right? Remember, this is a job creation program, and those jobs are created through construction activities. Therefore, we need to be very careful that the costs are going, the EB5 funds are going to the appropriate place. And that's where a fund admin can be a very useful tool, right? They're going to make sure that those funds are only released from escrow, only released to the project when and where appropriate.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And exit strategy is a big thing when you talk about fund admin and all that. That's on typically throughout the construction side of things. When you get towards the tail end and you hit the exit side of things, what would you say the biggest indicators are in terms of success rate when it comes to either refinancing an asset versus selling assets, things like that? Do you have any insight regarding those?
Yeah, I mean that's the big question, right? I mean every single project you look at has a different set of variables, different locations, different asset classes, and that's where it can be very difficult to predict the outcome of a project, right? That's everyone's goal. Pick the project that's going to be successful, that's going to be successfully refinanced or sold, and therefore able to repay its loan obligations, whether that be the EB5 or the bank or both, right? We want to make sure that project's successful. Trying to predict which is going to be successful is the challenge, right? We're not experts necessarily. As an EB5 investor, we don't know real estate. We don't know, uh, you know, how to evaluate these projects. One of the things you can look for is track record, right? So has this developer done this particular kind of project before? Have they done it in this location before? Is there a clear history that we can refer to and say, yeah, they seem to know what they're doing. They've done this successfully a few times in the past. I don't see any reason why this one can't be successful as well. Now, no two projects are exactly the same, so you do have to evaluate the underlying project. You can't only refer to track record, right? Just because someone was successful last year doesn't mean they're going to be successful in the next go around. It can be helpful to hire a third party to help you analyze that.
Mhm.
Having a broker involved that sees these projects over and over again can help you do your due diligence and understand, the risk involved.
Mhm.
Uh, that's the big challenge though, right? Making sure you hitch your
Yeah.
wagon to the winning
Yeah.
horse, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And the exit is only predicated if the project actually reaches completion, right?
Of course.
That's a big thing that investors we know on EB5 LA side really pay attention to from a delay standpoint, right? The things that lead up to actually getting to the exit phase. What are some signs or signals that an investor can look out for or be skeptical about from a developer perspective that could delay the return of EB5 capital, that could delay project completion?
Yeah, I mean, if you're seeing delays in construction, that could be a bit alarming, right? Hey, why are there delays? Is there something happening behind the scenes that I'm not, privy to? Are there permitting issues? Is there market issues? So if you see early delays in construction, that could be a bit concerning. If you're not getting regular construction updates from the developer, again, that can be concerning. Why are they not being forthright with you? Why are you not, privy to all the information available? Um, Ideally, you're getting regular construction updates, you're seeing progress per the business plan. But if you sense something's off, it may be too late if you're already invested in the deal, right? Hopefully you've already done your diligence. Hopefully the project's already moving forward. Hopefully there's no surprises along the way. Um, Again, you got to make sure you pick the right horse from the beginning, because it's pretty hard to change course once you're already invested.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of moving facets and a lot of factors at play when it comes to picking a project. So thank you, Trevor. We're going to go ahead. We're going to
Hey,
transition.
Braxton, I just wanted to add
Yeah.
in regards to topic. I mean, especially when it comes to senior and mezz.
Mhm.
Um, Look, I'm an EB5 investor myself. I did EB5 in 2016. I did a lot of homework before I invested. I ended up picking a project because it was the specific project I picked was a senior debt offering. I wanted to be with one where the loan to cost was on the lower side, where there was a ton more skin in the game from the developer. And more importantly, and this is just my personal preference, and I get it, not all investors are sophisticated, they don't always ask for this. But if I was going to be in a project in a mezzanine debt position, I'd probably want to sit and like look through the intercredit agreement, make sure that there weren't any terms that were unfavorable to me. So yeah, definitely new projects are the same. Not isn't I'm not obviously trying to like say that a senior debt project is the way to go or something like that. But there is a lot more diligence to be done, especially when there's more than one lender involved. Just something to
Yeah.
point out.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And there's plenty of success stories of people that have done their EB5 process through mezzanine positions or even preferred equity positions. It's not a one size fits all horse. It works differently for everybody in their financial situation or exactly what they're looking for. So thanks, Ishan.
And Braxton, real quick, just as an example,
Mhm.
you could be in a senior position, but if you're financing 95% of a project, that's not necessarily a good position,
Yeah.
right? You could be in a mezzanine position where the developer has 40% equity in the deal.
Yeah.
That's a great position, right?
Yeah.
So you can't just look at senior versus mezzanine and draw a conclusion. There's a
Absolutely.
whole number of variables to take into account.
Absolutely. And that's not even bringing into developer track record,
Yep,
liquidity,
yep.
brand association, all those kinds of things. So awesome, guys. Well, thanks. We're going to switch and we're going to move over to more of a legal aspect and kind of, Jacqueline, what you guys see over at your firm and how you guys operate In terms from the legal and marketing side of things, a lot of investors will often, as they analyze projects or they look through the marketplace, they see phrasing or verbiage talking about guaranteed returns, risk-free language. What exactly, in terms of compliance red flags, could you see from a legal perspective that an investor could then take and just kind of keep their eyes peeled when they're analyzing project marketing material?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are a handful of things that we, either advise clients about or they even come to us with questions regarding those in consultations. I think the top two are language that is misleading or, guaranteeing a certain outcome about a visa or repayment.
Mhm.
Ultimately, the language in the offering documents that the investors are presented with cannot promise a return or outcome for their filing. So keeping this, at risk requirement in mind is really important for investors when they're taking a look at those documents. Making sure that, there aren't any guarantee language and knowing that there has to be a realistic chance of potential loss or gain. Those contracts cannot, guarantee a repayment or a certain outcome because ultimately every case is different. And like you guys said, there are many moving factors for every single case. For our office, we're always, emphasizing how important source of funds is, but that's, not the end all be all for a case for EB5.
Yeah, absolutely. And, there's a lot of verbiage, so to speak, just thrown around. It really varies project to project. For you guys as a firm, is there anything in particular when you look at marketing material that you guys consider an automatic no-go, something that you would just wholeheartedly tell an investor, stay away from this, this is not legal, this is not legitimate? Is there anything out there that you guys just are hard-nosed for you as a firm?
Yeah, so I mean, any absolute or language that's guaranteeing a particular outcome or that repayment is something that, we're going to point out to an investor or just, put on notice for them during the consultation that these are things to look for. Again, reminding them that, there are many factors that can contribute to an approval or a denial. And one of the things to keep in mind is that, marketing materials, those can say certain things, but ultimately the documents that they're also signing are very important. And those are going to govern, what could potentially happen in the future in certain scenarios.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. And and in terms of practical legal steps, right? Because we always tell people that, there's two processes that are working parallel. You've got your immigration process and your project side of things. From the immigration standpoint, what are some practical legal steps investors can take early to make sure that they're protected in the long run?
Yes. So we always recommend that they do what they feel is their best due diligence for every party that they're interacting with in the EB5 process. So, one, finding an independent attorney to file that case for you. Um, it's a major life decision with a lot of money that's going into the filing. So making sure that they communicate with an investor or an attorney who, can explain that process and those requirements for them, making sure that they're taking a look at what these deal documents say, if they have questions, what does this mean? What am I signing? Making sure that they ask the developer, the project of questions that they know that they need answers to so that they can make an informed decision for themselves. Another thing is job creation, making sure that they understand what that process looks like for the EB5 filing. I think that's something that we also get a lot of questions about in consultations. Am I looking for this, particular W-2 for this job creation? Explaining to them that, indirect jobs are a part of the regional center filings, and that can make it more flexible for meeting those requirements.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you mentioned the word due diligence, right? They all are tasked to do due diligence on their own side of things. Do you guys do a lot of work dealing with registered agents, broker dealers, things of that side? Do you consider that as something that's useful from a legal perspective for an investor to retain or really look into?
It can be. I think we see investors who are really interested in that. And then we also see investors who are, kind of just taking on that process themselves and, doing their own research to figure out what they need answers to, what questions. that they need to ask to make that informed decision. We'll always advise them, everyone's due diligence looks different. So, an investor for this filing might have, used a broker or an agent, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you need to, or vice versa.
Yeah.
Making sure that they know that they can do what they need to get the process started.
Yeah.
Braxton, the one thing I definitely want to add is thinking for all investors, and I'd recommend this as an investor myself, is probably don't lean on your immigration attorney for investment advice. It's like
Right.
asking an electrician for plumbing advice. You know, immigration lawyers are good at what they do and they can help you with immigration problems. When it comes to the investment, working with the right people is paramount importance. You want to build the right team around you, the right lawyer, the right investment specialist. All of that is important. Working with people that are licensed. Look, and I've met investors which are very sophisticated that know what the formula of a cap rate is and its significance when it comes to EB5 due diligence. But there are a lot of investors who try and do some of that DD on their own. And for them, I would highly recommend, especially if you're based in the United States, talk to someone who's licensed, someone who's been doing this EB5 advising thing for a long time, usually a good broker dealer. They will stick with you all the way till the end till you get your money back. And they become your first line of defense if anything goes wrong investment wise.
Yeah, absolutely. And picking project is definitely something that investors should not let ego come into. If you're somebody who believes is qualified and you understand all the ins and outs of the financial verbiage and things like that, by all means, but agents and broker dealers can be incredibly helpful to people that aren't overly familiar and are looking just for a little extra guidance throughout everything. That is awesome.
I think.
Thanks. Yeah, go
No,
ahead.
I wanted to mention, that's something that not everyone is also informed of either. And those are things that we mention in consultations as well. We always clarify that we can't give financial investment advice. Is this a good investment for me? Things like that. But, some people don't even know that agents and brokers and things like that are
Yeah.
options. So making sure that they're informed about what their options are is really important.
Absolutely. Absolutely. 100%. Well, thanks, Jacqueline. Thanks, everybody. So we're going to transition. We're going to move over to Mr. Ishan here. Just a reminder to everybody who is listening, the chat is open. So if you have a question for anybody particularly or just something related to EB5 at all, feel free to write it in the chat whenever. We'll move to the Q&A here in about 10 minutes or so. So we'll move on to Mr. Ishan. You've built a career on helping investors feel secure in their decisions, feel educated, and a lot of people don't really understand a lot of the technicalities and the ins and outs. What are some early warning signs that you guys will help tell people or inform people that a project may struggle, stall, or succeed in general?
It's a good question. And look, when you're doing I mean, then we got to separate this out. What do you do before you make the investment and what do you do after? Right? Let's take Trevor, for example. If I walk up to Trevor and I say, Trevor, show me your project. What I'm going to dig through, and this is what I particularly do, is I'm going to dig through his business plan. I'm going to take a close look at that Gantt chart. And maybe I'll even show up at the project and I'll say, hey, Trevor, take me for a tour of your project. And then I'm going to take a look at that Gantt chart and check out where they're in construction, where they're supposed to be. If I choose to go ahead with this particular project, let's just say I really like it, I've done my DD, I'm really happy with it, I think the comps are solid, I think that Trevor's project is really solid because he's done many of these in the past, then I'm probably going to still keep an eye on that project even after I've invested. I'm going to make sure, is the construction still happening? Are they making sure that they're staying at cost, under budget? And a lot of those things you can ask, of course, that's one option. Well, the other stuff is you can always do on your own, and as an investor, making sure that you're reading your updates carefully, which is why I always encourage investors, and I've done this in the past when I was actively, actually soliciting people for a project, is I would show them, look at some of our past project updates. This is what we tell our investors on a regular basis. And usually, when I was, again, actively working in the EB5 space, I would be a phone call away if people, even if after they've invested, had questions, if the project was going well, if there were any delays. And look, delays happen. Acts of God can happen. I mean, the project that I invested in was hit by a hurricane. There's this, you got to give a certain amount of grace to the folks who are actually building and doing these projects. But it is an important idea to keep track of what's going on, how the money is being spent, if it's being spent correctly, if there's a fund administration service involved, keeping an eye on making sure the money is actually being utilized how it should be. Those are all important things. And again, a good project sponsor will usually keep their investors in close communication at all times.
Yeah,
Sorry
for
for
sure.
calling you out, Trevor.
No, all good things.
No, it's a great example, and you're right. There's a lot of things to look into. If you are an investor, right, Nishan, you've been one yourself, like you had mentioned. What are some of the required documents or really important documents that these investors should be asking or requesting from projects to just make sure they're looking at the right stuff and they know where to look?
I mean, I think there's some basic things that you can do even if you just know the brief highlights of the project, right? Let's take, for example, job creation, which is something you mentioned earlier. Like, looking at that job creation buffer, how many extra that jobs there are per project is a great way to kind of make sure that, you're investing in a deal that is going to have enough jobs. A better way of doing that would also be maybe picking a project that has already started construction, that has its construction permits in place. If you and if it hasn't started construction, you can always ask as part of your document discovery is show me your permit, show me the fact that you're in the clear, you've got your environmental stuff in place as well. So if all of those things check out, if construction's already active as well, maybe they've already created a certain number of jobs, you can invest in a project that may have already created the jobs even before you invest. So again, that's just one of the many things. Similarly, looking at the developer's history, what's their liquidity like? Are they what is their track record in terms of building projects, making sure that they're refinanced or sold on time, however the exit strategy is. And then, of course, looking at like third-party reports, third-party feasibility reports, and economic reports as well. One thing that I've always looked at when I just want to verify if a project is really good, and again, this is just a me thing, I'm not saying everyone should do this, is I love to pop open the business plan, look at the comps, look at the comparisons of that particular asset versus the others. If it's a hotel project that I'm investing in, maybe I'll look at how much is this hotel planning to charge, what's their room rate or what's the rate per key, and then I'll go and compare that with other hotels in the area. If it's home for sale, look at it same way. You've got open tools like Zillow and stuff that you can always use. You can see how the real estate in the area has been doing over time. And just similarly, even for apartment buildings, if it's homes for rent, look at what the nearby rental rates are like. Usually a good project will do a lot of that comparative analysis for you, and you should just be able to dig through and find it. But hopefully also if you're working with a really good broker dealer, this is typically part of their package too, that they'll walk you through some of those things as well to kind of give you that comfort.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's just harping on again how valuable a broker dealer and agent can be, is they can help you with a lot of the due diligence because when you start
Yeah,
going through these
I'd
processes,
push back on that agent thing because I mean,
right?
look, where I'm from in India, there's especially over the recent few years, there've been reports of unscrupulous agents, but that's always been the case. And I
Yeah.
encourage people, if you're going to use a middleman, use someone that's licensed. Make sure the guy's actually taken a securities exam and knows what it means. Usually, like there are like checks and balances in place. There are brokerages that keep an eye on the people that are actually marketing and selling projects and what the communication they're having with you, then
Mhm.
making sure it's not biased or is pushing a incorrect narrative. And I would highly recommend again people work with people that are licensed. That is an important thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
Great
Braxton,
point.
Braxton, I would second that as well. I mean, not all agents and brokers are created equally. I've seen agents overseas that are very savvy. They understand the deals. They're very particular about what they'll present to their investors.
Yeah.
And I've seen brokers domestically that, quite honestly, just don't understand the financials. They don't understand the deal
Yeah.
points. So it goes both ways. But just know who you're working with, and don't place too much value on them. Do some work for yourself. Do some homework. Ask around, because not all agents and or brokers are created equally.
Yeah, absolutely. And like we said earlier, it's not a one size fits all, right? Some
Yeah.
people can really benefit from the services of a broker dealer. Some people don't need it at all. It really just depends up to you and your discretion as an investor, how comfortable you want to feel and if you kind of need that extra little push and guidance. Ishan, from the that was talking more on the project related side. From an investor perspective on the immigration related side, there's been a lot of talk and a lot of concern, especially since Trump came into office, about potential backlogs, the EB5 industry as a whole. Is there anything in particular you can talk about that's either often overlooked or adversely overanalyzed that investors could probably get a little better clarity on?
Yeah, so I think this kind of touches upon, a lot of the work that my organization does. Me and a group of other investors back in 2021, we started a nonprofit called the American Immigrant Investor Alliance, AIA. It's purely donation funded, where we get donations from EB5 investors. We do a lot of work with the government. We do lobbying work on the Hill. In fact, we're working with some congressional staffers right now on an EB5 bill, which I hope to see out there sometime in the future. Um, we do a lot of like FOIA requests and FOIA litigation with the US CIS. We've even got like a former US CIS ombudsman, working for us too right now. And some of the stuff that our data has uncovered has been about the number of people that have already applied in EB5 in these set aside categories, along with what that expected backlog looks like. So, there's a couple of things I would say when it comes to, the set aside categories and things like that. The first thing is, look, if you're in the United States and you can benefit from this concurrent filing, whether you go with rural or high unemployment, it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. And again, I'm just simply talking from an investor perspective. I'm not an immigration lawyer. This is not immigration advice. But fundamentally speaking, if you can do concurrent filing, it doesn't really matter whether you pick a high unemployment or rural project. If the visa bulletin says current for you and your country, you're good. Like, pick a project that's good for you. Pick one with a lower risk, right? Of course, rural is what's hot right now because people want their green cards quickly. And I fully understand that. But at the end of the day, like, especially if you're from like a country like India or China, there is 100% a backlog. If you apply today, you are not going to get your green card within a year or so. You're probably looking at like 4 or 5 years. That's currently where the backlogs are at for both India and China. And our data kind of has shown that pretty clearly. And so I would say at the end of the day, pick the right project for yourself. It's going to take time to get your green card. You should settle in for that wait. If you're outside the country, sure. If you want to go for something that will hopefully give you your green card faster, rural does have access to more visas. You may get your adjudication a little bit faster than high unemployment. But at the end of the day, like, I really am of the belief that it's more important to pick the right project. Like, okay, whether you pick rural or high unemployment, it's going to take you longer than a year to move to the States. Why not pick a project that has a better chance of getting you your money back? There are good rural projects and there's bad rural projects and there's good high unemployment deals and bad unemployed deals. And sure, there's a couple of infrastructure deals out there as well. But that said, I really think that, investors shouldn't worry so much about the timeline. If you're planning to move to America, like, I mean, it's worth the wait, is what I would say. So that's kind of my take on things like wait times and set asides
Yeah.
and backlogs. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
just to
absolutely.
add to that, sometimes we get investors who, want a certain direction from us that we can't give. It's a decision for them to make. And sometimes it just takes figuring out what's the most important thing for them. Is it, a particular project type? Is it, like he said, green card turnaround? Or do you have a child whose, age is a child who's about to age out, and that's the driving factor behind your filing. Sometimes an investor has to take that time to figure out what is the thing that's going to help me make this decision, because at the end of the day, there's a lot of moving parts, but again, it's a major life decision. So
Yeah, absolutely. And over at EB5 LA, and I'm sure Trevor sees it over at HomeFed, it fully just comes down to the risk appetite. Depends how risky they want to be, depends the priorities, and kind of, like you said, Jacqueline, there's a lot of factors, whatever they prefer and however risky they want to be. Picking the best project that works for your individual situation is of the utmost importance. Awesome, awesome, awesome. All right, so we're gonna kind of transition right now to the Q&A section. So kind of round robin it, and I'll direct a couple. I know we have a lot written in the chat here, so I'll kind of round robin it to you guys. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start first and foremost to Ishan. When you analyze projects and stuff like that, what would you say would be a good or a safe loan to value ratio for EB5 investors versus developer equity? What would you say would be a comfortable number?
Oh God, that's not a good question. I was so pushed back on that. Like, I don't think there's a specific value. I'm not going to come out and say, hey guys, it's 50%,
Yeah.
because it varies depending on projects. Like, I've seen really good affordable housing projects that are 90% loan to cost, but they're still fundamentally good deals. That affordable housing projects that our community needs, it's going to do really well. And then I've seen luxury hotels and stuff which have sometimes had a very high loan to cost, and I've been very nervous about that. Um, it's not, there's no finite answer. There's no specific
Yeah.
value that I would give. Every single project type is different. There are so many more fundamentals that matter. And where does the business get its revenue from? And again, we're focusing a lot on real estate. There's a lot of non-real estate projects out there. There's manufacturing, oil, gas, commodities as well that are all out there. You have to, you got to take a look at all of that stuff. The big thing that I would say is look at the project sponsor. I mean, have they done this type of thing before? Have they worked within these sort of margins? Are they able to make this work? And are they counting on a really good refinance if interest rates come down? Let's be fair, interest rates ain't coming down for a while. Actually, maybe I'll take that back depending on what this president does. But that said, we can't count on that. You can't count on interest rates coming down. If a refi isn't possible in time, like all this LTC, LTV figures will mean nothing. Like I
Yeah.
would say focus on the business fundamentals. Is the business itself sound? That is
Yeah.
far more important than anything
Yeah.
else.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. So, Jacqueline, a lot of people will often ask about the source of funds, right? And source of funds is another thing consistent with the theme of everything. It truly varies case by case. If you have an individual that is potentially selling a business instead of selling a home to utilize the funds for EB5, what kind of documents or requirements come with selling a business for it to be applicable?
Yeah, so if you're selling a business or your, ownership shares a part of that business, the question is going to be, how did you obtain that ownership in the first place? We want to show that one, the business is, registered as needed. It's been, put together correctly. You have your business registration documents, agreements showing how much ownership you have of that, but also, if there was an investment required for that ownership, what kind of funds did you use to get that investment in the first place? Did you use salary? Did you sell another type of asset, a different type of stock or property? And then it kind of trickles down from there too. How did you get the stock or property that you sold? And then you use those funds for, starting your business or getting that ownership. Those details can vary from investor to investor. So making sure that we fully understand that story so that we also know how to communicate to the client what documents are needed for the filing. And then ultimately the story ends with, this ownership was sold at this point in time. Here's the sale agreement. Here's my bank statement confirming that I received these sale proceeds that I'm now using towards EB5.
Mhm. Awesome, awesome, awesome. That was super in depth. Uh, so Trevor, in terms of the actual construction side, right? You guys at HomeFed, you guys physically do the projects, especially Codavera 2 that I know you guys have going on now. When you guys are doing the construction, what is a issue or something that could come up in a construction phase that people don't typically think about? Something maybe a little bit more niche that isn't as popular or mainstream.
Yeah, I mean, I think Ishan mentioned a hurricane earlier, which is something you don't typically think about, right? You're thinking about construction and construction activities, but there are things that are completely out of control of the developer or the builder that can, you know, materially affect a project.
Hmm.
We hope those don't happen. They don't happen very often, whether it's a hurricane, an earthquake, a fire, right? Things do happen. In my experience, if you have all the permits in place and you're working with a good contractor, projects typically move forward, right? There might be little delays here and there. There might be maybe you change something related to the architectural design or the plan, but for us, in my experience with HomeFed and our business, the vertical construction is kind of the easy part of the business as long as you have the right players involved. But certainly environmental factors and stuff that's completely out of control of the builder can be something to consider, right? So people always think about earthquakes in California. I mean, I've lived in California my whole life. I've never seen an earthquake cause any issue with a project, but it's a real threat, something to think about. Fires, certainly. We saw a lot of fires in Los Angeles. If you're in the southeast, earthquakes, certainly, Tornado Alley, you got, acts of nature that can be something to
Mhm.
consider, but not something to be overly scared by, right? How does the developer mitigate those issues? Do they have insurances in place? And it can all be managed.
Yeah. Yeah. There's ways to mitigate risk all throughout, right?
Yep.
And that's what a good developer will do. Awesome. There's a lot of questions, so let me scroll through. All right, Ishan, from an investor, identifying potential conflicts of interest. This seems like a common question that's getting asked between regional centers affiliated with projects versus developers. Can you speak about a little bit of some potential conflict of interest problems that could arise?
So, I mean, it depends. There are plenty of cases where a developer can be vertically integrated, right? The same developer that's out there spending your money is also the one that's out there raising the money for it. Then you've also got a different model when you have a separate developer and a separate, well, this is a technical term, an NCE manager. So, look, I think I think if you are a developer on one side, you'll say, well, it's great because, we're one party, we're dealing with everything, we know what we're doing, right? And the other party will say, well, we're a fiduciary and it's better to go with us because we're going to keep checks and balances on the project. After spending so many years in EB5, I've seen both models work and then also both models not fail investors at times. Sometimes people who act as NC managers just don't have good underwriters on staff. When you look at some of the track records out there and you start digging into projects that weren't so successful, you begin to wonder why did a company like that even underwrite a deal like that in the first place if they claim to be that good. And I've also seen the other scenario where developers who are completely vertically integrated have not made the right decisions, which is why I kind of bring it back to the project itself. I mean, look, there have been developers and regional centers out there that have done good projects, and sometimes they've done a project that has failed. You gotta look at each individual offering separately. I know there's a lot of like talk in this industry about going with people with a good track record. I actually am one of the few people that pushes back at that. Because look, a track record just doesn't mean they get everything right every single time. Track record is good. That means they know what they're doing. But, for example, I've met a lot of mom and pop developers that have done really good, small, stable projects. And now they're doing their first EB5 deal. It doesn't mean that they're bad. It means they're good at real estate. That's what it should be. They should be good at spending the money. Now, if it's a first time developer or a first time fundraiser who's now getting into real estate development, I'd be wary about that.
Yeah.
So the conflicts of interest will be there. If you're not sure, if you as an investor, again, like aren't super savvy, if you don't find it joyful to flip through a PPM, hire someone who does find something like that worthwhile. Work with them. They will be able to point out a lot of those conflicts of interest right away.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Awesome. Thanks for that. Miss Jacqueline, a common question, the I-526E, right? That's typically the very first, or at least a big significant step for people when they're moving forward. What exactly are timelines looking like for at least review right now with the I-526Es?
Yes. So generally, we're seeing a timeline of 6 months to 24 months, just depending on project type. Um, our office recently saw a 2 month and 22-day approval on an I-526E, which is a very fast timeline that we've seen. It might be an outlier, but again, it just shows, how fast some of these petitions are getting approved. Making sure that the investor knows that, funds have to be fully invested before that form can even get approved is really important, which is sorry, excuse me for my light, which is the basis for that green card application that, we may or may not be filing concurrently for them.
I gotcha. I gotcha. Yeah, I mean the 2 month and some change, it's pretty fast, right?
Yeah, it's awesome.
That's pretty fast. Awesome. So for Trevor, when the documents get sent out to investors, right? PPM, marketability indexes, feasibility reports, how can an investor know that these are one, accurate and legitimate, but two, is there like an expiration date on these? How exactly does it go about in terms of generating these documents and the legitimacy, accuracy of them?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, there's no fixed expiration date, right? It could be that a feasibility study done 5 years ago is still accurate today. I mean, that's unlikely, right? The market changes, it changes every day. If the stock market falls off
Mhm.
tomorrow, that feasibility study from yesterday may not be real valuable anymore. All of a sudden, the variables have changed. So we can't say, 6 months or 1 year or 2 years, right? It's going to depend on current market conditions. If things are stable, that feasibility study's probably good, right? Nothing's really changed, so to speak. Uh, Having said that, check who did the feasibility study. I suppose you do background on them, make sure that they are legitimate, right? If I
Right.
go and provide a feasibility study for some project and I've never done one before, what good is that, right? Make sure
Mhm.
you've got proper support professionals that are providing this data.
Mhm. Absolutely. Awesome, awesome, awesome. And then we got time for one more question here. It'll be directed towards Ishan. With the job creation, right? With the job creation for these projects, oftentimes there's numbers thrown around from anywhere of surpluses from 50% up to 500% for the job creation. When people produce these, how often, more times than not, are these accurate, or is there a lot of variance between these as projects continue, as they go on, or do these stay pretty standard throughout the entirety of a deal?
I mean, if you're getting a job creation report done for a project based on a construction budget you've laid out, and then you go and start changing the dynamics of a project and saying, okay, now I'm going to spend $100 million less on steel because I'm going to be directing it towards somewhere else. It sounds like then you're making material changes to the project itself, which is a super big red flag for investors.
Mhm.
Um, Generally speaking, a job creation report, once it's done, yeah, sure, a couple $1 million here or there might change towards the end of the construction, but generally speaking, it should stay the same. And if you're feeling doubtful as an investor, you should be able to ask your project, hey, can you give me the latest job creation report? It doesn't have to be something that's certified or something like that. They can even do a back of the napkin type report based on current expenditures and give you a general idea of where things stand. So, I would say like you don't want to be in a project where they're saying, hey, there's been a change to the job creation report. Job creation reports only change if, again, if the construction budget or where you're supposed to spend your money and how you're supposed to spend it, that alters. And if that is changing, sounds like the project is changing. So you've probably got bigger problems on your hands then.
Yeah,
Yeah, and
absolutely.
Braxton, I just want to chime in real quick. The jobs reports are very reliable, and that's one of the beautiful things about the regional center model. You don't have to worry about W-2s and this employee, that employee. As long as that job's created, as long as it's generally consistent with the business plan and that original jobs report, there's going to be jobs. And typically there's buffers, right? We're producing 15, 20 jobs per investor. And in my experience, developers, builders usually spend more than expected, which means more jobs. So
Yeah.
that's one of the great things about the regional center program. The jobs are really easy as long as the project is built.
Absolutely, for sure. Well, I think that's all the time we have. You guys, I appreciate each of you three taking the time out of your day. I guess the consistent theme is that projects vary, analysis of projects vary. Everybody's situation is different. If you are somebody who's new or if you're somebody looking to make a decision, there's always more you can learn and people who you can consult, whether it's from an immigration perspective, a broker-dealer perspective, or a nonprofit such as Ishan's. There's always options for you out there, and it's not a one size fits all. So whatever you guys prefer for your each individual journey, take those steps as necessary. Again, thank you guys for joining in, and I appreciate it. And we'll be hosting a webinar again here soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good
Thanks.
one.
Thanks, guys.
Yep.